Hey, this is Pastor Mike Ferguson at Cornerstone Community Church here in Lexington, North Carolina, and I want to welcome you to our first Fusion Roundtable. Let me spend just a second explaining what we're trying to accomplish here. We want to, as our church is a multi-ethnic, multi-generational church, we want to touch on some issues in our world that are so important in our culture. We want to talk about some of the issues of injustice, social problems, racial issues, and not that we can solve all these problems, but we just want to show you that we can sit down, different ethnic groups, white and black, and have an honest, open conversation and eventually come up with some solutions to help us. So let me introduce our panel to you today. To my left, we've got Kevin Leake, who is the principal of Thomasville Middle School, and he's also an elder here at our church. To my right, I've got Monty Lewis, who is a seasoned pastor who has been in all types of ministry roles throughout his life and is now a pastor elder here at Cornerstone Community Church. And to my far right, I've got Brian Edinger, one of my good friends, who is formerly the pastor of a church in Islip, New York, Crossroads, and is now here serving at Cornerstone. So as you can see in our leadership, and we've got another leader who's working the camera today, we have some built-in diversity, and that's on purpose. And so this first one, we want to talk to you from our congregation to where you are in life. So I want to jump right into the thing today. We've got a couple of topics to discuss. I want to jump right into this topic. First, how has COVID-19 impacted, if you want to speak about Cornerstone Community Church or the church in general, how do you think it's impacted? Monty, I want you to speak to that first.
Here at Cornerstone, as we are a new church plant, and we are trying our best to do this multi-ethnic, multi-generational church. And it's interesting how this COVID-19 has affected us as a church. It's been said in recent days that the church has left the building. And we can literally say that here at Cornerstone. It's difficult for us because being a new church plant, we very much need the physical touch between pastors and parishioners. And we've tried to do various things to help us through this process. We obviously are doing online services. As elders, we are trying to make contact with each one of our parishioners every week by a phone call. And we are trying to use our small group time through Zoom, which is this great new thing that is going on. But unfortunately, all of this is not really working so well all the time. I look at things, we started this church using small groups so that we could impact the church and the community. And as we are trying to use Zoom for our small group, it's difficult because we're finding in the small group that I head that there are weeks that either people just forget or they have better things to do. And so it's challenging for us. And we are trying to figure out how we can make sure that there is a church to come back to when all of this is over. And as we are journeying on, the interesting thing to me, though, is that since we have been doing online services, we are actually reaching a whole lot more people. We are, as far as I know, we are reaching across the United States and up and down the United States. I know that I've had people in Atlanta, Georgia, that have looked at this. I've had people in Philadelphia area that have looked at this. I know we have some parishioners that came to us from California, and they have friends there that are looking at it. So it's interesting that we are reaching a lot of people, but still we are lacking that physical touch.
Yeah, thank you. Pastor Brian, would you speak to that?
Yeah, kind of going along with what Monty was saying, I can remember when we were first debating, even before the coronavirus and all this stuff came out, of, should we be putting services online? Because I can remember then always the fear was, well, if we make it available to people online, they'll never show up to the building. They're never going to come. They're never going to be there. And so there was, I can remember, I remember even having this debate with some other pastor friends of, should we even be posting things online? Just for the fear that we would have our congregation stop to coming to the building. I think for me, I think that's probably one of the bigger fears that I have. I think at first everybody's going to want to come back. It's going to be, big party. I mean, we may have pajama day and everybody can come in their pajamas, whatever it happens to be. But I am worried that the longer this goes on, that the longer that it happens to be where we're not gathering together physically as God's people, that we're going to feel that there's not a need to do that. And so that's really more of my concern. And I think at first everybody's going to do, but at the same time, part of my concern too is when we come back, everybody wants to hug, shake hands, do everything. When are we going to feel safe to do those kind of things? And then when we look at the Great Commission and we want to go out and share, when are we going to feel safe that we can go out and share, or not to make other people feel uncomfortable when we're coming up to see them too and share it? So it's going to be a very challenging time, I think, coming back. I mean, I think people are going to really look forward to it, but we have to make sure that everybody still feels safe enough that we can kind of come back together as God's people and then serve that way too. And, make sure that we still want to come back together as God's people, that we have missed those relationships of being able to see each other and be around each other.
I'm going to switch gears on you. I'm not going to let you answer that question. I want you to answer the next question. I know you had an answer all prepared. All right, well, go ahead. Share a little bit with us how it's impacted the church.
Oh, my. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind, and this affected us in the school system as well as church. We went home on March 13th with the anticipation of coming back on Monday the 16th. So the same thing happened here at the church. We went home one Sunday with the anticipation of returning the following Sunday. So there was really no preparation as leadership, as church leaders, for our congregation on what to do in an isolated situation. So to Brian's point, the longer that we are in this situation where we're not meeting physically in the building, there is some concern about who will return. But we also have to think as church leaders that we were not prepared ourselves, but also we were not able to prepare our congregation for what virtual church will look like. And then another point that I wanted to make, and I'll turn the microphone back over to you, is I think the church has to learn from Blockbuster. Blockbuster did not adapt with the times, and is no longer a company that you can go to and purchase videos. So as times adjust, I think the church, with our approach, has to adjust. I don't think you change the Bible. The Bible is the Word of God that will stand the test of time. But our delivery of what God's Word says, I think we need to really look at how people react and respond to the delivery of God's Word.
Yeah, excellent points by everybody. I think, for me, I think the church is going to look a little different when it comes back. I think one thing that it has taught us, it has boiled down what is really essential for us. Because a lot of churches have a bunch of programs, and that's fine, or a bunch of different ministries, but we can't do hardly any of those. So now we figured out what exactly is primarily important. So I think the church is going to look a little different. And to speak to Kevin's point, I think that maybe this in some ways is a blessing because it has taught us how to use technology to reach people, where a lot of times we would have not done much with that. So very good answers. Let me move on to my next point, and this one's maybe a difficult one to discuss, but I want us to talk about it. How do you think COVID-19 has impacted minority communities more than the majority community? Or let me just be honest with this. Why has it impacted the black community more? Let me give you some statistics before I hand over the microphone. 33% of the people then hospitalized have been black, yet 12% of the population is black. That's a very big difference there. 92, I couldn't believe it. This comes from the CDC website. 92% death rate for blacks compared to 45% death rate for whites. So the question I have for each one of you is, why do you think these statistics, which are from the government, which doesn't mean it has to be true, but statistics from the CDC are true? Why is it impacting African American communities and also Latino, but more than it does the white community? So I'm going to reverse it and hand it back to my brother Kevin, put him on the spot and let him answer first. Kevin?
Thank you. I think that is a very good question. I think it has a lot to do with access to appropriate health care. I think it has a lot of reflection on access to correct information, and I think that plays a big role into the differences of the numbers of African Americans that are impacted by the virus.
Okay. Brian, you speak to that and then pass it to mine.
Yeah, I was trying to look up, some of the numbers that go along with this, and it is pretty staggering. And I'm going to just assume that I am completely out of the loop and didn't realize that there were things like institutional racism and things like that as well. And part of that is just because of I've just never really dealt with it before. And honestly, never really saw it all that much. And now that I keep reading more and more about it, and I keep reading things like this, is what really brings it to the forefront of where we really see some of the racial divide. And it's really opened my eyes to some of those things. I mean, I was reading some of the stuff. I know some of it's like, maybe it's part of it is the essential workers. Jobs that we didn't think were essential at one point in time have now become very essential, and sometimes that is held by minorities too, and those kind of things. And so maybe it's because they're now forced to be exposed more to the public because they're considered to be essential, and maybe they don't have, some of the job benefits because of some of those things, and being able to take time off work, so they have to be there. And so it's really hard, and I've been struggling. I was really interested to hear what you guys say about that, because I guess for me, I just feel like I've been so in the dark for so long about it. And then having seen this come up and seeing what the racial difference is, I really want to know what you guys think of what we can do to try to help those things. Because honestly, now that I know that there's a problem with it and it's there, I want us to be able to help. And I feel really helpless right now. And so I'd love to hear some ideas and thoughts and opinions on what we can do.
Hopefully, as you can see by now, with the last few comments coming from Brian, that we are here willing to be transparent and honest with each other. Let me say this, because as we were sitting down trying to get this together, as we walked in the door today, Brian looked at Mike and said, I was invited because I was a white guy, right? And I answered quickly and said yes. He didn't really expect that. But as we have fun, we do realize the seriousness of what's going on. And I've found that most white people don't understand the plight of black people in the United States of America. And we're talking about this coronavirus, this COVID-19 that has affected the black community more adversely than the white community. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. But the one that stands out in my mind most prevalently is the fact that the systemic racism that goes on in this country is the cause of this. Because when you think about it, it's black people, for the most part, that have those essential jobs. That not only do they have to go and be able to feed their family because they don't have the savings amassed that most white families do. So they've got to go to work every day. And it's interesting to me that when you look at this, and when I say on the front lines, you look at most of your grocery stores and big box outlets, there's a lot of black people that are working in those places. And then it was just in the last week or so, and not all of them, mind you, but just in the last week or so, that they're requiring employees to wear masks and gloves. And very honestly, I don't even know if they are supplying these for the employees. And then, of course, there's the healthcare issue. And those of you who don't know me don't know that I am on disability. And here's the problem that I have with being on disability. I thank God that I worked a lot of years for a check and I'm able to get that, and I thank God that I have health care. But the problem is I've had a lot of serious issues where I had to have surgeries and deal with hospital stays. But because of this systemic racism that comes along with disability, my Medicare is on an 80-20 plan. Now, the check that I get, I am already below the poverty line. So where am I supposed to come up with the 20% when I go and stay in a hospital and now I owe $3,000? Where is that supposed to come from? And that's a part of all of this that's going on with this COVID-19. And like I said, we want to be very transparent and honest today so that you can kind of see the things that are going on. I applaud Brian for saying that he's at a loss. And unfortunately, most white people are at a loss because they really haven't had to deal with it. And then when it hits them right in the face, they don't know what to do with it. Can I say, do I know where we go from here? I don't know if I do. But I know this, that when black men and white men get together and start to talk about these issues that are in positions of leadership, is then when things start to happen. Because it was said that Lexington, North Carolina is one of the most segregated cities in North Carolina. Yet we are here in Lexington, North Carolina, promoting what God wants us to do with a multi-ethnic, multi-generational church. And I would say that not only is God all over this, but God has to be all over this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Brian, I'm very similar to Brian. In the last 5 years, you know, I knew racism existed, but it didn't touch me. And I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, went to schools where I was the minority, but still it never was really real to me until I started to study it and read and start to open my eyes to what was going on around me. And I think what you guys are saying is this is not the effect of COVID-19 on the African American community is not really the problem, it's just a symptom. The symptom is a problem of the system that's broken. And the system is put in place by those in power, and everybody who's in power, what they want to do most is keep power. And this is not just a new thing, this has been the history of the United States. I mean, first it was forced slavery, then it was the black laws, then it was Jim Crow laws, and today it's the prison to pipeline, pipeline to prison for African Americans. So we have some systematic problems that we need to tackle. It's good to talk about these things, but what do we do to impact them? And the honest answer is this system is much bigger than us four, but where can we impact, just chip away at it? And I was reading a book called One Blood by Dr. John Perkins, one of the great civil rights leaders. And this is what he said. I just want to read this for you. This is what he said. If we want to impact systematic changes by the church, and we're talking mainly about the church at this point, there are 3 R's that will bring about some social justice. 1, relocation. And what he means by that is he's speaking to Christians, and specifically white people, is that we've got to move and be a part of the communities that are suffering. It's real easy for me to sit in my nice house and talk about the ghetto. It's another thing for me to live in the ghetto. And then the second one is reconciliation. We got to cross lines and say to our brothers and sisters, we see this is wrong. Let's join hands and try to begin. This is going to take years and years to fix, but we can begin to join hands and say, hey, when this happens to my brother Kevin, I'm going to stand up and say something about it, because sitting down and being quiet is the worst thing to do. And the third one is redistribution. Now, I'm not going to get into all that, but basically that means helping minority communities have more opportunities to have success. Education, jobs, and those things. So I'm going to go off on all this if I don't stop. But let me just say it this way. Pastor Derwin Gray, who's pastor of Transformation Church, one of the biggest multi-ethnic churches in the United States, explained it to me this one way when we were in training. He said, pretend that we sit down here with a Monopoly board, okay? And we start off a little differently, because normally you start off with just a bit. Brian gets half of the stuff, I get the other half, and you guys get nothing. And we roll, and we play the game. Who's going to win that game? We're going to win. So we got to figure out a way to do some redistribution. And I'm not sure how that works. I'm not saying reparations or none. I'm not getting into all that. I'm just saying training and equal opportunities, okay? So I think those are some systematic things we can change. So anybody have anything they want to add real quickly before we move on? Okay. Now, I want to touch on this topic, and this is really what drove us. We were planning this for a while. This incident drove us to this today. And this is the incident that, unless you've been living underneath of a rock, you've heard about Ahmaud, right? You've heard about this young man, Ahmaud Arbery. And I'm kind of reading some of this till I get it right. This young man was in his early 20s and was killed in Georgia as he was out for a jog. There were 2 men, and they are white, Gregory and Travis McDonald, the father and son. And Gregory had some background in law enforcement and things like that. And they saw, this is their account, they saw Ahmaud jogging and thought he looked like someone who had committed some robberies in that area. But what's interesting about this is I did some research on this, and there was only 1 robbery committed in that whole area in about the last 3 months. And guess what robbery it was? Anybody want to guess? Somebody broke into the McGregor's car and stole a gun. So I'll just leave that there where it is. So they saw this guy and thought, hey, he's the one that did this. Although I'm not going to get into all that. They didn't identify him, but they saw him. They chased him down. There's a video. It's kind of hard to watch. The way I interpret the video, it looks like Ahmaud's jogging. The truck kind of pulls up to him. He goes the other direction. It follows him, and then they get out of the truck, and a scuffle ensues. 3 shots are fired, and Ahmaud falls to the ground and dies. So, there's a lot of things we could talk about this. Why do you think, let me start with this question. This happened in February. What is it now? It's May. It's almost heading towards mid-May, right? I mean, we're heading to the 10s here. Why is it taking February, March, April, May, almost 4 months for the population of the United States to hear about that? I want to ask Kevin, could you speak to that?
If you guys know me, I talk about quotes that I see on Facebook. And I saw this yesterday, so I want to kind of read this. Did you ever see that video, that viral video of 3 grown black men chasing a young white jogger with shotguns and pistols confronting him, then killing him, then claiming it all was a citizen's arrest. And the police and prosecutors just said, sure, no problem. Me neither. I don't quite know where to begin with this. As an African-American man living in a neighborhood, that there may be 3, 4 African-Americans that live in my neighborhood. And I love my neighbors. I have the greatest neighbors, but I walk out the door differently now. I have a African-American son, 22 years old. He dates a white young lady. I fear for his life. When I see red lights, blue lights in my rearview mirror, I question, will I get out of this situation? I think right now, with the number of incidents that have taken place over the last several years, I think black people are tired. I think black people are tired of the injustice, individuals walking away scot-free for the murder of innocent, unarmed African Americans. And kind of to the point that you mentioned earlier, Pastor Mike, I don't think it's for the oppressed to fight this battle by themselves. It's going to take individuals that are not of color to stand up and stand for the injustices that are taking place. And being quiet about it is not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason we didn't hear about it till now is the fact that it was 2 white guys attacking a black gentleman and killing him. I think if it had been the other way around, you'd heard about it instantly. I think it's some of the systematic problems we have in our country. And let me just say this. I don't have the same fears that Kevin does. I have 3 daughters. I don't have a son, but Brian has a son. He could probably speak to this. What I told my daughters about the police, if they pull you over, you keep your hands on the wheel, but you're very polite and courteous. I didn't tell them, like you have had to tell your sons and your nephews, and hey man, you got to be very careful because you might not walk out of this alive. And so when I look at this video, my question is, these are some of my questions, okay? Number one, if this happens to me and I see somebody that I think's breaking in a car, done something wrong, my first step is going to be to call the police, not to grab a shotgun and go after them. Number two, if I chase after them and I get out of the car with a shotgun, I should not expect them to be cordial. Because if you get out of a car with a gun coming after me, I got 2 choices. I'm going to run or fight. And I believe the man was fighting for his life. And so I think we all probably know this, that last night they did charge both of them with murder and aggravated assault, and they've put them in jail, and hopefully justice will come. So all of those things are issues that I think we need to talk about. So, Monty, let me ask you this question. What message does this send to African Americans in the United States?
Wow. When I look at this, and I must say, this scenario is nothing new to me. We've seen it time and time again. And I must say, I grew up in the hood, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was portrayed on cops for a lot of years the Lamar Avenue district. I grew up a block away from this Lamar Avenue. And some of the things that we were privy to growing up, now, Dad was an old Southern boy that he didn't really let us out the house a whole lot. But we still going to school and all of that, we're privy to a lot of this stuff. And what does it say to our community, the black community. I think Kevin was right. We're tired. And here's the interesting thing to me. As a black preacher, a lot of times people don't want to hear us quote Malcolm X. But one of the things that he said that was very profound was by any means necessary. And I must tell you that I don't know that there'll be marches again. And I said I grew up in the hood for a reason, because really what these two men did to this young man was a hood mentality. Because Mike said that his first response was that he would call the police. On the hood, if you see somebody breaking in your car, you ain't got time to call the police. You want to go and deal with it. So what does that say about our community as a whole, our nation as a whole? I think the biggest thing is that the black community is really tired. And I say that to say because not only have I grown up with this stuff, but at 52 years old, I'm still encountering this type of stuff. I walked into a store in the last week with my mask on. And a young white lady that worked in the store looked at me funny as I was walking in the door. Kind of like, you need to take that mask off. Now, I walk with a cane. I'm not sure how far I was going to get even if I picked up something. So I very much appreciate, again, black men and white men being able to sit down together and talk about these things, and to be honest and open with each other. Me and Mike have been friends for a lot of years, and we've sat in each other's living room talking about issues that would offend other people. And we never got offended. We've tried to deal with things as best we could. When I look at things a lot of times, even here at Cornerstone, I've talked about some things that happened in my life as a black man. And one of the responses that I got was, I didn't know this stuff was going on. And it bothered me that my response was too quick, because my quick response was, open your eyes, because this stuff is all around us. And so in the last few years, it's been an open thing. You know, years ago when the lynchings were going on, it was done under the cover of night most of the time. Now we see not only those who are called to protect and serve, they are shooting black men down in the street.
This happened in broad daylight with the mob.
Exactly. And so, you know, you look at all of this, and the problem is that when Malcolm X said, by any means necessary, and that's not to say that, you know, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of white people that I've talked to think that there's a conspiracy in the black neighborhood to rise up against white folk. Not the case. But at this point in history, we are willing to do whatever it takes, not only to reclaim our sanity, but to reclaim who we are as a people.
Thank Yeah, I appreciate that very much. I said to Monty on the phone yesterday that this Ahmad situation is unbelievable to me, and his response is, it ain't unbelievable to me. It's just normal. It just blows my mind. Pastor Brian, I want you to speak to, and I know I'm putting a lot on you for the whole church here, but from your perspective, how, in general, how has the white church responded to issues like this? Trevor Martin, all the, I can't think of the names, but all the issues we've seen. How has the white church responded, especially since you're a pastor? How do you think white pastors have responded to these racial injustices?
Yeah, that was nice and easy. So maybe I'll round about my way to get to the answer there. Talking about one of the things with the incident that happened, though, one of my concerns, though, is had this not been videoed, would we even see justice from this? I mean, we just now had arrest from those things, and it's like I said before, I just had no idea that. I mean, to me, I'm like, this stuff should be long gone in the past, and I think that's why things like this are very important, is that we need to be able to discuss it, and I think that's kind of where, as bad as things like this are that's happening and what's going on, we always want to try to look at what can be the good that comes out of this. And I think, even stuff like this is bringing it to my attention as a white pastor. And I can remember, when I was a church planter in New York, and the church that I was at in Central Islip, and I was there for 3 years, I was the minority. We were right there in a rough area where the MS-13 gang was, and there's gang violence around us. We had 4 teenagers that were killed just a mile from the church, part of all of that stuff as well. And having the fear of walking out on the street and trying to understand those things. And even for me, most of our population there at the church was black. We had Latinos that were there as well. And honestly, the best thing that I think I could ever do for them was to listen to them, because I just had no idea. And hearing some of the things that they were talking about, okay, what should we do? And trying to come along, all right, how can I do this then? As far as, being a white pastor, where it doesn't just seem like I'm going out to do it because I'm supposed to do it. I think we have to be careful in the church that we don't want to be, let's make ourselves multiracial just because we're supposed to, or we want to look good for everybody else. The reason why we want to make ourselves multiracial is because that's what God's church is. And the thing for us is that when we do that and we actually come together in genuine faith and genuine love with each other, then we can talk about these things. And, I can tell you from my viewpoint, a lot of it was just sheer ignorance. And again, I don't want to speak for every white pastor in the world, by no means. But I think a lot of it is still surprising. To me, I'm like, okay, we crossed that hurdle. Let's go on. Now let's just get out and share the gospel. And then we realize there's all these other boundaries to this too, and all these other things that make it that much more difficult of what's going on. And I think that's why, I love what we're trying to do here at Cornerstone is we're not just trying to get together just so we can say, hey, we are multi-ethnic. We want to be able to come together and have discussions like this. And for those of you that are listening, I think this is great to be able to just try to see, all right, yeah, I had no idea. So now we can be on board with each other. It's going to take all of us to even start to even make that change. And it has to happen with discussing it and talking about it. And I think, at least if nothing else, that's where we go. My only concern is sometimes that's where it stops. It's like, okay, well, I really feel for you, brother. And then that's it, and that's all we ever do. And we have to put action to the words as well. And so I think it starts with us being able to listen and communicate with each other. That's why I'd love to hear from you guys. And I'm trying to fight back tears here, and I can't even imagine. I have 2 sons of just, be careful when you get pulled over by a cop. You never know what's going to happen. I've just never had to even deal with that, and oblivious today, thinking that's still not issues, and yet it is. And so for us, I think, and doing things like this and talking, as long as we don't let it stop here, I think that's where we can move on and really try to start making some changes, not just here in Lexington, but all throughout the world.
I think, Ryan, I echo your sentiments. I think the first step is to listen. This is another issue, but I grew up in a public school system. I never learned black history. I didn't know. I knew slavery a little bit, but I didn't know about the black laws and really about, I didn't know any of those things. So as I've tried to read authors, I'm currently reading Rethinking Incarceration by a Black Pastor. I've read a lot of books about these issues. And one of the things that really got to me was simply this. Listening is the first step, but it can't be the last step. And I think that the white pulpit has been quiet for too long. Because there's people in our churches, like Brian just said, that don't really know because they've never experienced it. And if we don't stand up and say something, at least make a point from the pulpit that this is an issue, then we're just as guilty as everybody else. And so it's time for people, the white folks that have influence, especially in the church, to stand up and say, listen, and then stand up and say something. Your words go a long way. And so I would say for us, for pastors, we got to do that. I don't want to make this the longest video in the history of the world, but we celebrate Black History Month here. Each week we try to have a video or a testimony. And this year when we did it, I had a video about, I didn't know this, I learned this, about the black laws that can really continue slavery, that some of the laws they put on the books that if you walk too close to a white man's fence, you could be in prison. And they did all this to take them and put them in slavery and corporations, but you can research this. I showed this video, passionate video that, man, it just moved. I had a man in our congregation email me and say he was not coming back to our church because I was blaming all the problems for the blacks on the white folks. And my response to him was, I don't think you paid attention to the video, but if you want to be real honest, yeah, a good portion of the problems are the white people. So I'm not saying that to say, look at me. I'm just saying we've got to stand up and say something. And so what can we do to make these changes? I think the first thing the white church needs to do is we need to get outraged about this. And we need to continually speak about this, preach about this, because it's all over the scriptures, right? We're all created in the image of God. We've got to stand up for those who are created in the image of God. So I think we can do, that's one thing we can do. The other thing I would say is, the white church, mostly the conservative white church, is pro-life. We will go to war for abortion, right, not to have abortions. And I believe life is from conception. That's just my opinion. But we're awful silent when Ahmad, the 23-year-old black man, dies. What about his life? Does it not matter? So what can we do? We can continue these conversations and we can stand up and start to be vocal. And when we do that, then we can make some changes here at Cornerstone and then North Carolina and the United States. I want to thank you guys for this time. It's been precious to me. I didn't know what to expect, and I don't care if anybody really watches it or does anything. It's been really good for me. And we're going to try to do this every month. The 1st of June, we're going to have another panel, and we're going to do it on multi-ethnic church planting and why biblically we should do it and practically we should do it. So I think that'll be a good time. And we'll be back with you guys in June. So I want to say God bless you. Continue to learn. Never stop learning. Continue to ask other people how they're doing and walk in their shoes. Because if it wasn't for Jesus coming to earth and walking in our shoes, we would have no salvation. And I want to say this closing. I'm getting everything out. I want to say this closing thing, especially to white evangelical Christians. You need to remember this point. Jesus was not a white guy. He was Middle Eastern. I want to say God bless you. I love you. And we'll be back in the next month to talk more about these issues. Thank you, panel. You guys have a good day.